I was a South supporter from young. In fact, the South Sydney origins go deep in my family. My father's family arrived in Australia after the war in 1947 and they settled in Randwick. And they immediately latched onto the club. In fact, my little old grandmother, long gone, who used to wear black and was about 3'4" tall, would ask every weekend, did South win in Greek? It was part of the ritual of the weekend, whether South won or lost. She never watched the game, but she wanted to know that South won because if they'd won, we were happy. So the South Sydney seed was planted in the family a long time ago. And then my family settled in Maroubra on Maroubra Beach. And you can't get more South Sydney than Maroubra Beach. And my cousins would take me to Redfern Oval every weekend. My father actually was involved in soccer. He was a president of one of the Greek soccer clubs. But my joy didn't lie at Wentworth Park, which is where that soccer team played. It lied at Redfern Oval. So I'd make a quick dash from Wentworth Park to Redfern Oval to watch South play and make sure I get there in time. I'd watch the lower grades of the soccer and then dash across to Redfern Oval. So that's how it started. And to answer your question more fully, the involvement with the club, the direct involvement with the club, came on the verge of its expulsion. I was a mere fan, attended home games, away games with a ritual passion. We'd do all the road trips, we'd go through the highs and the lows, and you know, there were highs in the 80s, I'm sorry, but a lot of lows in the 90s, and they were difficult years leading up to the expulsion in 1999. And I happened to go to a fundraiser in 1999 where George Piggins was being honoured at the Bennelong restaurant, actually, at the Opera House. And my hero, George Piggins, walked past me at the end of the luncheon. And I was encouraged by someone sitting at my table, get up, give him your card, you never know, they might need you. And I was sort of mumbled my way up to George and said something ridiculous and pressed my card into his palm. And I remember doing that, and George mumbled something back and then was sort of escorted out of the room. And I wasn't to know that day that I'd get a fax from George saying, come and make a presentation. But deep down we knew that the gun was pointed at us. And as Andrew Denton said, they were going to shoot Bambi. And I got a call and that fax that I referred to from George to say, please come, we're doing a presentation or hearing from lawyers who might want to take on the case for the club should the club be expelled. And I arrived late. There was a row of lawyers who'd just done a presentation. I sort of stumbled into the room late and realised that there was like 2 people left to do their presentations, and that was me. I got up, and there were some far more eminent lawyers than me who'd already done their little pitch as to why they should be given the job. And it came to me, before I knew it, I'd sat down and it was my turn. And I gave this fairly jumbled little speech about, if I remember rightly, I don't know very much about the law about this area, but all I know is I'm South Sydney and I'll fight to the death. And I sat down and I thought, I've blown it. I've absolutely blown it. There's no way in the world they're going to pick me. And there was a slight sense of relief about that because it was such a daunting task to take on News Limited and the forces of the NRL in this bid to keep this club alive. So I was privately hopeful that I'd get the job, but sort of slightly relieved that I'd done such a bad job that probably I wouldn't. Anyway, another fax arrived from George saying, you've just been given the job of representing South. And 3 or 4 days later we were expelled. And I remember thinking, this is real. All of a sudden, this club that I've adored all my life is on its knees and is turning to me and my fledgling legal firm for support. So it was quite a turning point in my life. It dominated my life for the next, from 1999 till we were admitted effectively at the middle of 2001. For almost 2 years, my life centred on South Sydney. And what was frightening was that this club that I viewed as this enormous creature, this all-encompassing entity that had such power for me as a young supporter, was in fact a hollow shell. It had been reduced to nothing through the oppression that it had experienced and through the slow process of attrition. The club had been worn down. And the hardest thing about it was not only was the club my client, but every South Sydney supporter thought they were my client. It was their case as much as it was Andrew Denton's or George Piggins or Ray Martin's or Alan Jones. All these people that I was reporting to on a daily basis, they were important, but so was every fan on the street, because we were turning to them for help. And the bigger noise they made in their marches, their rallies, the bigger the presence we were going to have. And we wanted to be in everyone's face for as long as possible. Of course, we lost the injunction case, we lost the long trial, then we appealed to the full bench, and 6th of July 2001 was a great day. I remember everyone coming to the office for the march up to court. We had no idea what the judgment was going to be. And I could feel there was a sense of optimism that day. It was funny, there was a feeling that the appeal had gone well. There was a feeling that News Limited were being worn down in the media, that public sentiment had gone our way. In the last big rally that George and his team skillfully organised, we made sure that there were NRL jumpers of every club there, and we didn't do that artificially. These people came, they wanted to come. St George supporters, Roosters supporters, they all came to support us. So we felt that the tide had turned. So that day when we got the judgment, there was an explosion of sentiment. And we knew that even if we won in court, they didn't necessarily have to put us back in, but that there'd be such an overwhelming avalanche of opinion in favour of the club, that the club had at last won, that they'd have no choice. And they didn't have any choice. They put us straight back in the competition. Sometimes you have the glare of the microscope or the glare of the camera lights on you, and it's not very nice, because people can turn on you quite harshly as that cycle of sport, win, lose, lose, can continue, and you can suffer for that, and your family can suffer, because it's all voluntary and it's all done for love at the end of the day. For me, my entree into South was through the legal battle, so I was using my professional skills to help the club. But once the legal battle was over, it was a huge drain. It was a burden on my family, my immediate family, but my extended family. My father was to pass away 8 days after we were reinstated. And even though he was ill, it was quite sudden. And so that was a really difficult period. But the joys outweigh the burdens. The joys on those people's faces mean everything. Those embraces that you remember from people wanting to have their photograph taken with you. I mean, it's bizarre that they'd want to have a photo taken with a chairman or with just an administrator, but the people sensed that it was a communal effort. I wanted to have my photo taken with them as much as they wanted to have their photo with me. It was their win as much as ours. But occasionally, the price was quite a heavy one personally, and I speak for a lot of people involved. I speak for George, I speak for Andrew Denton, I speak for Ray Martin, I speak for all those people, Mikey Robbins, who gave up their professional careers to a large degree, put on a fight, or sacrificed, the ones in the media sacrificed a lot of connections in the media to further the club. Albo in the Parliament, standing on the floor of the Parliament talking about the Rabbitohs. I mean, these are extraordinary moments. The reality hit that we had to get this club back on the field. And I remember sitting in a room with Craig Coleman, on this table actually, Craig Coleman and Phil Gould with a big piece of butcher's paper, trying to find out every available player that could be signed, because we had no players. It was July, it was August by then. And I remember Adam Muir's name came up. He was available, and we were all in triumph because Adam Muir was available. At least one credible player was available that we could sign. So the euphoria quickly subsided and reality set in. He felt that George was battle weary. George had fought a battle like no other. He'd become that figurehead. He still is in many ways a figurehead for the club. Occasionally reluctant, but generally still a figurehead for the club. And we respect him for that. And now, the trophy that has pride of place for our playing ranks is the George Piggins medal, and will always be so. George was battle weary. By readmission, George had had enough. And he conceded that to me on a few occasions, that the time had come for change and a new outlook, not scarred by the dark years of court battles and marching in the streets. And so when I did take over the chairmanship, it was quite daunting. I remember chairing my first meeting and thinking, this is bizarre. I'm just a fan who's now chairing a South Board meeting in these hallowed corridors with all these famous heads around on the walls. So that was difficult, but it's the view set in pretty quickly that we had to do something radical with the club. A club that was the people's team had to somehow metamorphose into something that had an element of private investment, but still retain its public character, its people's team ethos, because you couldn't lose that. That was its strength. That's what had kept it alive. But we needed, so we brought in Peter and Russell, and Peter ended up moving on, but made his contribution as well, and the club hasn't looked back since 2006.